This is Jeffrey Madoff, and welcome to our podcast called Anything and Everything with my partner, Dan Sullivan.
We were just discussing a topic which, when I said it, Jeff said, we got to talk about this topic, but it reminded me that it's a topic that virtually every entrepreneur likes to hear from other entrepreneurs, and that is, how did you get your first customers? How did you go from your first customers to where you are right now? So my story starts in 1974. When does your story start, Jeff?
1976.
Yeah. And, not to go into great detail, but I was a copywriter in a big ad agency in Toronto. BBDO was the global company, but it was the Toronto branch of BBDO. And I was a good enough writer that I could have probably made a career out of copywriting, commercials, ads. Probably not a great writer, but would always be employable. Previous in my life, I had really enjoyed the activity of coaching other people on how they were thinking about things. Okay. And it wasn't so much that I knew what their business was. It wasn't so much I knew, what their skills were, but we get them to think about how they were managing their time, what they were shooting for in terms of goals, what kind of activities they were doing that they were good at, what kind of activities they needed to have other people around them that were better than they were. So I jumped out, and probably by a lot of luck, I immediately got coaching contracts with individuals who were really top life insurance agents. And life insurance is a tough business to be good at because you're selling something that the benefit of it doesn't happen until the customer is dead. You're talking about things. At that time, the life insurance industry was still controlled by big insurance companies. You were an agent, but you were an agent of a particular company. New York Life still is one of the huge ones, but you had Northwestern Mutual, you had Metropolitan, you had a lot of big companies. There were actually over 1,000 in the United States. But these were the top of the top, and they actually had a term for that called top of the table. So they had one group of very good life insurance agents, which were called $1 Million Round Table. And then the top ones, probably the top 500 in the world, were top of the table. And that had just been created. And I hit it right at the creation of this concept and got 3 right off the bat. And they were referred to each other. One would get me as a coach, and he'd say, this guy's really good. He'll get you really clear about what you're thinking about. And I went around, which was different from a lot of industries. If something works in one industry where it's very competitive retail, you won't tell your competitor that you're using someone who's helping you. But life insurance was very different. The other thing is, the reason why they were top life insurance agents was all their clients were successful entrepreneurs. And I really hit gold right there. And these were not life insurance agents. They were every other kind of business. And I said, if I just get the top agents over the next 10 years, I'll get all their clients, which turned out to be true. And that's really the short story of a long journey. But it's just making sure it worked with one person who was really happy. They could see the benefit for their clients and customers. And we built up. So we've had pushing 25,000 entrepreneurs now who've been in coach. Right now, we're about 3,000 active, and they come back. They'll pop out for a year or 2 years. They come back. I've had one over 33 years, and he's in and out 5 times. He'll come in for a couple of years, go out for a year, come back, get focused again, and he takes jumps each time he comes back. So that's it.
So was it a conscious thing? By the way, when you talked about, life insurance is a tough sell because the benefits don't kick in till after death. It's kind of like religion, same kind of thing. Be a good person because when you die, you'll get the rewards in the afterlife. I'm more practical. I would like those rewards while I'm still living because I know I can feel them.
Yeah. It's really interesting. One of my top agents back then, he discovered something, and he'd meet with a potential client and he'd say, "Do you love your wife?" And the guy said, "Not really." He said, "Do you love your children?" He said, "Not really." He said, "Do you love your employees?" "No." not really. Do you love your reputation for being a good husband, a good father, and a good employer? He says, yes. He says, we'll insure that. You only insure what you love. Really good life insurance agents, tremendous psychologists. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think anybody that's selling something successfully is good at reading people?
Could be, but insurance agents really deal with fundamental life and death issues in a way that a lot of businesses don't. Yeah.
Now, so it happened in your case. Did it just happen that it was life insurance? Or was that just serendipity? It happened to be life insurance and you figured out how to parlay that.
That had happened, I don't think it would have mattered, what kind of business it was. That had happened as fast as it did was because of life insurance, because back in the 70s and 80s, they were the meetingless people. They'd have study groups, they would have professional associations, they would have company meetings, and they would talk and talk and talk about how they were getting where they were, and my name came up. So I think it was an unusually unique and powerful networking industry that I happened where they didn't see each other as competitors.
But don't you think with your ambition and resourcefulness and savvy, no matter who that first client would have been, you would have been somehow building a business out of it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have stopped at failure.
Right. Right.
No, I mean, once I jumped out from the ad agency, this was I was 30 and I was pretty set. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to make a go of this.
Yeah, I mean, my story, there's a interesting transition in the sense that I had moved to New York. I had closed my first clothing company because my backer had made it clear to me in a very fair and good way, by the way. And he said that, I'm backing you because you provide employment for Wisconsinites. And, I had about 120 people working for me. And he said, if you ever move the business, because I know this business is centered in New York, I won't continue to back you. And, he set his terms, and that was fair. I understood his reason why. And when I moved to New York, because I always figured, money comes and goes, time only goes. And certainly as I get older, I also am fascinated in a linguistic sense of the parallels between time and money. In business, we all hear that time is money. Well, not really. It's not really that. But, you spend time, you spend money, you save time, you save money, all of that kind of thing. So when I moved to New York and I started another business after a year of traveling the world, because I'd saved up enough to do that if I lived frugally, which I did, had a great time. And one of the fabric companies that I used to buy from, Erlanger Blumgart, and Mr. Erlanger was a really good guy. And he said to me, do you know anything about the movie business? I said, not really. No, I mean, I read books about film because I'm fascinated by it. I love it. But do I really know anything about it? Not really. He says, well, you got a good head on your shoulders. You know business. My son is your age. He's gotten involved with some people. Would you mind meeting him? Doesn't listen to me at all. But you're a contemporary. He might. I said, sure, I'd be happy to meet him. And his son, Tommy, had optioned William Burroughs' book. William Burroughs, for our listeners who don't know who that is, was one of the seminal figures of the Beat generation. And the scion of the Burroughs business machine. His father was tremendously wealthy. I mean, I met William, he was in his early 60s at that point. And they were going to make a film based on his book called Junkie that was being directed by Dennis Hopper. And Dennis was staying at Tommy's house. So I met Dennis. That was the second person involved that I met. He and I hit it off. He wanted me to be in the movie, which was kind of cool, until it became clear this was never happening. But anyhow.
I like the New York texture of this podcast. You could hear the sirens in the background.
Yes, I call that the New York Symphony.
Yeah.
That's what it is. When I call my friends as I'm walking around the city, they go, okay, I don't know, it's been 5 minutes. I haven't heard a siren. What's going on? So that was the beginning of my transition to the film business. I had sold my second clothing company. And so making that exit, and because of this meeting, which was somewhat totally serendipitous, I ended up getting into film production. And because of my background in film, I knew that, number one, there was an opportunity in videoing fashion shows because that wasn't happening before. And I knew the language, even though, I didn't have a big business. I knew all the problems big companies were having. It's just, mine had lower dollar amounts attached to it, but it's the same thing. So it happened that I got into doing fashion videos, which led to music videos. But I deliberately went after, and fortunately got clients like Radio City Music Hall, the Harvard School of Public Health, different businesses outside of that, basically for my own edification, because I wanted to do more than one kind of business. I wanted to tell more than one kind of story. But the way that it started was total coincidence, but it just happened to make a really nice transition from one to the other. And I was able to parlay my knowledge of fashion into merging that with my knowledge of what I was learning about film, because I knew that before I was doing that, nobody was videoing fashion shows. So the designers would just rely on their employees to tell them what it was like. And my first client was Halston and then Ralph Lauren. So not a bad way to start off. And that got me, that kind of marketed me. I could get meetings just about any place because I had the two of the most visible designers, famous designers, as clients. And I'm proud to say, like you are, I'm proud to say that I worked with Halston until he stopped working. And Ralph Lauren was a client for 36 years until I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And like you, I'm very proud of that longevity, which I think is something to be proud of.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. What is the approach you're taking today that you have a long success record of that taking this approach, but you had the approach right at the beginning? You've just added more experience to the approach. It's sort of like a structure and a process, but you've just added a lot of different kinds of experience to check out, is this always true? That's what you do. It's sort of scientific. Does it work here? Does it work there? Does it work there? If it works everywhere, you've got sort of an axiomatic laws that this is true. Can you think of something that was there right from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that the through line is that I've always gone after things that I found interesting and that I enjoyed, and that the primary concern was not that I could make a lot of money doing this. The primary concern is this how I want to spend my time? Is this what I want to do? What else could I be doing?
Yeah. Like creating a Broadway potential play.
That's right. Did I have any idea that was going to happen?
That's a moneymaker.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
I remember our first conversation. You almost tried to dissuade us. Yeah. Yeah. Not really. I mean, we were very, very positive, but you said there's two types of support. One is moral support, which of course I appreciate, but the other one is I'm actually looking for dollars here.
It's true. That's right. That's right. And you and Babs were kind and generous and believed in it enough to do it. But, it's funny because
we're just waiting for the next funding round.
Yeah, I'm going to be giving you that opportunity quite soon. I don't ask until I need, and I don't need until I ask, And it's interesting, the way my teaching, which I did for 16 years at Parsons School of Design in New York, came about was I was a guest lecturer. Really enjoyed doing it and interacting with the students and having them, challenge with questions, and each week coming up with an agenda that would benefit them and be interesting to me. Frankly, the way yours and my relationship has evolved. Starting off, we were at a couple of meals together, but as we got to know each other and realized that we had a lot of shared interests and traits, such as interest in thoughtful conversation, curious about how things work, not just the things we knew. and all of those sort of things. And that's been the really steady thing in my life, because I had a tremendous financial opportunity when I was probably 25, about, yeah, I was 25 or so. And I won't go into the whole story, but I was asked to take over buying American businesses for this German firm that I had done business with. And because of what I had gone through with those people, it's just not, I didn't want to do it. And, I was offered a lot of money and a car and, moving, they did finance my way into my previous apartment and that sort of thing. But, it ended up, that's just not what I wanted to do. And I didn't accept the position. But I think that it's so important. I can't justify spending the majority of my time doing things that I'm not interested in, no matter how much it pays me. I'm just not able to do that.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I'm really very conscious of entrepreneurial longevity these days, simply because I'm experiencing it myself. And I notice the people who are very successful who bail out at a certain point. They say, that's it, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then it becomes leisure. They're interested in leisure, or they're interested in philanthropy or something like that. And travel, and one of the things I notice, the ones who have the great longevity is they're alert, curious, and they're very, very responsive to new learning experiences and new business experience. And they're very resourceful in shifting how they do what they do to something new. And that seems to be a very fundamental internal driver of them forward. And the other thing is I notice is that they never talk about their age very much. They never talk about, whoa, boy, that year really went by fast. And I said, I don't know, the more interested I get in more things, it seems to slow things down. It doesn't really speed things up. And what I'm doing today is more interesting than anything I did in the past. So there's an improvement that's taking place. I sense that about you, too. I don't sense any world weariness about anything that you're involved with.
No, because most of the things that I'm doing now, I wasn't doing those things 10 years ago.
No, but there's an improvement to the things that you're doing.
How do you mean improvement?
Well, one is not looking at it from the inside, but looking at from the outside. You're in your 70s, you're across halfway to 80. And the project that you're doing, the play, is bound now for the West End of London, which is one of the two greatest theater markets in the world. And it's a big deal. I've seen the play 6 times. I've invested at each funding round, and it seems to get bigger and bigger. And who you're coming into contact with, your contacts with very famous corporations now who are very interested in entertainment now, who are taking a really deep look at what you're doing here because they're saying this might be a new big thing for us. That usually doesn't happen to people in their 70s.
Yeah, I am aware this is maybe where there's a difference between us, in the sense that I'm very aware how fast time is going. That isn't anything that is making me feel desperate, but it makes me feel like I can't believe how fast time is going. It just, years clip by quickly. And, I think that when you enjoy what it is you're doing in the moment, like when I've been up writing our book, when I'm really in that zone, 4 hours, 5 hours can pass. And, it could have been 15 minutes. It felt like that. I love that level of being totally mentally and emotionally immersed and producing stuff.
Yeah.
That's a lot of that's.
Yeah, it's creative. And I think
yes, and it's gratifying.
It's the aspect of creativity. I think creativity has its own time zone.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And there's no recipe for getting it. You got to find out what works best for you.
Yeah.
And, another thing that's great is that you're very supportive about the effort.
Yeah.
And, co-authoring something together can be a very bumpy, rocky road. This is my first at co-authoring, but I think that we both are mature enough to know the dance steps, as you're getting things from me and I'm getting things from you, the synchronicity that happens, and it's not like we got to know each other just before this project started.
No.
You recognized something that you thought we could build and set up the conditions that could happen.
Yeah. Well, an aspect of that is that you had vast connections in a world that I don't know. Okay, the theater world, the fashion world. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs in a lot of different businesses, but I don't really go into their businesses. I have established what's common for all businesses. I've established it's almost like an entrepreneurial geometry. If you want to build this and have it stand up, you got to, nature only supports right angles. So, you got to make sure that things are solid and everything like that. But just to pick the type of interviews that you're doing for this book, I have no access to those individuals, and I have no access to what I would say the commitment that your interviewers are making to really help your side of the book. I mean, they're really, really interested in helping you, and they're giving you very valuable material. And there's no way I could have had access to that world except through you, and.
But isn't it fun, the joint discovery that happens?
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel good about the fact that, the people that I've met and gotten to know over the years, like Kathy Ireland, that, asking her to do this, she's making the time to do it.
Yep.
And so many of the not only generous people that I have actually have had direct contact with, some I have met through others who have said, and they've, who've said, set up an introduction.
You got to talk to so-and-so.
Yeah, exactly. And then some, like the one that I was just telling you about before we started recording, this professor whose specialty is storytelling and what makes a good story. And she's, nationally renowned. Will I get her? I don't know, but I'm going to reach out. It's so interesting. So many times I've been in situations, whether we're talking about, the concert that we're going to be doing in London and, casting a star in that position just because it's basically a marketing thing, doing this concert, or, with the book and somebody that you ought to talk to, and somebody say, well, I don't know if you can get to them. They might be, wait a minute. Where I'm at right now is I don't have them. So I'm either going to stay in the same place or better the position.
Yeah.
So none of this speculation makes any difference.
Yeah.
And it was one of the things that Lloyd Price used to always say, which was the sure way to make sure nothing happens is to do nothing. So if you just fret about, well, do you think they'd take my call? Do you think they'd, all that kind of thing? Find out. You're not going to be any worse off than you are right now. And I have found
ignorance is a solid foundation.
Yeah. And oftentimes unshakable.
Yeah. One of my phrases, people say, well, what if it doesn't work? And I said, we won't know less.
That's right. It's exact same thing. Exactly right.
We will not know less. We'll know more.
Yeah. And there's an excitement that comes along with who we got.
Yeah. And, the other thing about it, and this goes, I think, to the general theme of what we're talking about here, is that there's a coin for improvement, and one side of the coin is excitement, and the other side of the coin is risk. Okay. And you don't get one side unless you have the other side.
That's right.
They have to have equal portions. And one of the things, and I'm answering my own question here, why do they drop out? They don't want the risk anymore. Mm-hmm. And that means that they're not getting the excitement anymore.
Right. That's right. Which has the potential to be useful if I'm seeking investment.
Yeah.
But it's also sometimes people just shut off.
Yeah.
They're like across the board done.
And you know what I find invariably, it's who they've surrounded themselves by at this point in life.
And what is that?
That they're not with risk takers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're everybody's hunkering down for security right now. Don't want to change anything. Don't be doing that.
Well, so many of those people, the kinds of risks that we're talking about would have no effect on their lifestyle at all.
No.
And, I have had people that have approached me for investment. And, the first thing that if they respond about, well, how risky is this? I said, if you're looking for a sure thing, this is not it. If you're looking for an exciting ride and a lot of enjoyment along the way, and you can talk to any of the people that have invested, I think that you'd enjoy that. But if your concern is you don't want to take the risk, I don't want to try to talk you into it. Mm-hmm. I respect that. Go with God. But, I'm not going to try to convince you. Mm-hmm. And with you, you and Baz were very willing, but with you or nobody else did I ever do any hard sell.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can. The kind of people I'm approaching, they don't want to be sold. Mm-hmm. And I don't like selling, but I can be really excited about the story I'm telling you. And I think communicate that excitement. And I think that's important to be able to do. I had a different way of phrasing it, but one of your insights was the double sale. And which, I love that because I was saying that to my students 16 years ago. First, you got to sell yourself on the idea, because if you're not excited about it, how can you expect anybody else to be excited about it? And it was interesting to me. I said, you're not ready to pitch this yet. If the first thing you're talking about are the obstacles that you have, as opposed to the excitement and willingness to overcome those obstacles, stay away from it.
One of the things that I've learned, and painfully I've learned this, is that I tend to talk about new ideas out loud, like.
Me too.
Yeah. And I find that you got to be very, very careful when it comes to team members, especially members of my company, and that they don't understand that talking about ideas doesn't mean that you're committing to the ideas. For them, if Dan talks about a new idea, that goes on their list of something they're going to have to do. And I found this was very dangerous. So I created a little form, which you've experienced on this project, called the Fast Filter. And I said, if Dan hasn't sent you this sheet of paper, or there's a electronic version of it, if Dan hasn't sent you this and he's talking about something, you can just ignore him. Don't do it rudely, don't do it in an insulting way, but you don't pay any attention. But if you get this form and it comes to you, Dan sold on this 100% and we're going to do it. And it's clarified a lot of problems in my company. On the other hand, I'm more and more, I keep quiet until I'm ready to send the form. So I've learned it in two ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've gone through my own version of that, because to me, that free and open exchange of ideas is exciting.
It's good for podcasts.
Yes. Yeah, but you can also rattle people who their job is to get things done for you, and all of a sudden they're feeling barraged by something. I didn't even know about this. And it's, well, it's not real yet.
Oh, no, we're just talking.
That's right.
There is no such thing as just talking in a lot of.
That's right.
Yeah. It's very interesting. The question I asked you, what was true about you at the beginning? What was true about you at the beginning that's still going strong is the reason why there's no ending.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean by ending?
Well, we haven't retired. We haven't retired. We're doing our most exciting projects now, not earlier in our career. I was really struck, and it kind of surprised me that Daniel Kahneman, Daniel Kahneman, fasting, he committed suicide on January 28th. And it was an elaborate preparation. It was a whole project to go to Switzerland, where they have, laws and assistance. Canada's another place. Canada is a good place to commit suicide. And anyway, and I've been following that because I read his book, Fast and Slow Thinking.
Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow.
And he was a big, enormous influence. He had enormous influence. He had an enormous audience. And I just found it really struck. I mean, he was 90. but I've been following it. It was the front page in the review section of the Wall Street Journal about 3 weeks, and they said this is very, very disturbing to a lot of people who, who followed him over the years and, took guidance from him and everything. So I've been doing a lot of AI searches on it, but he hasn't really done anything for about the last 15 or 20 years. He was very famous. Those books came out several decades ago and his thinking on this. And I just wondered if he ran out of ideas. And I have to tell you, I don't think anybody understands suicide. It's one thing that most people can't comprehend, and everything like that. But it's a piece of useful information that I use. When do I notice that someone doesn't have any excitement anymore, doesn't have any, and I'm not attributing this to him at all because it's a special case, but he was very famous and he did it. But it's an enormous reaction to this on the various publications, and people said, what's this say about human life and everything else? And I said, it's not really understandable what goes on inside of another person when they decide to do it. I can understand extreme pain, unbearable pain. I can understand it. But he didn't have any of those symptoms, according to the friends and family that he knew. But my feeling is, we've talked about this several times on our podcast, your number one job is always make your future bigger than your past.
Yeah. And, Daniel Kahneman had a partner, Amos Tversky, and
he died.
Yeah, many years ago. He died in like 2004. So when Kahneman won
31 years.
Yeah, Kahneman
21 years. Yeah.
Yes, and Kahneman, he got the Nobel Prize, and they don't give it posthumously. So Tversky didn't get it. I think that there's also a thing you're saying, like pain. That's one thing. Another thing is fear of future. And that can manifest many ways. That fear of the future could be that you have contracted what will eventually be a completely debilitating illness, and that you will inevitably, despite whatever your intentions are, become a burden to your family. Mm-hmm. And you are no longer able to live the life that you want. Mm-hmm. And there are things that a dear friend of mine committed suicide. And the first time he attempted it, the reason it didn't happen, as he told me, as he was getting on the chair and putting the noose around his neck, there was somebody pounding on the front door, and it was a friend of his.
But it would have been impolite
to do that, yes, at that moment. But about 2 years later, it happened.
Yeah.
His sister had committed suicide, and their father committed suicide. And they don't know, why is that? That's not uncommon, by the way, that there is suicide in the family. So I don't pretend to know these things, but I know.
It's a subject that I have, because I have never had the thought, not that I've led a particularly negative or unhappy life, but I've never, I had my famous divorce and bankruptcy day, and I noticed that it didn't bother anybody else. I was the only one. So, this is my deal. I have to take care of it and everything like that. But it's an interesting thing because it's being recommended in Canada that the government will help you commit suicide. And I think it has to do with they just don't want to pay for elderly people. They'd like to get elderly people out of the system, pension.
But I also think along with that, coupled with that can be the fact of the debilitating expense on surviving family members.
Could be.
That, there's not going to be a good outcome. Mm-hmm. So if there's not going to be a good outcome and it's only going to get worse, is that the quality of life you want? And while you're still sentient, if you've expressed your wishes to do that and you feel like you are protecting your family and you don't want to go through the inevitable route that will take you, mm-hmm. God, I never want to be there. But I do have an understanding. I've had another very dear friend that committed suicide, quite a bit younger. But the one friend was in his 50s. The other one was in his very early 40s. and not unhappy people. Both of them I knew for quite a while, but it's also, you just really don't know people sometimes. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of those things that it's really hard to comprehend, because a
Mhm.
lot of times, well, did the person seem depressed? No, they didn't seem depressed,
Yeah.
or you didn't recognize it and they had grown very adept at masking it. I mean,
Yeah. 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 My big thing is to, because I've had a theme in my life that goes back at least 40 years, always make sure that what lies ahead is bigger than what you've been through, you know, and that's a muscle that I've built in my brain. So there's always the big thing lies ahead. The big thing doesn't lie behind. Yeah.
yeah. And as my wife said,
And that has an effect on your health too. That has an effect on, how you take care of yourself. It has an effect on how you handle your money and everything like that.
yeah, it's interesting because my wife, Margaret, will talk about things. And I said, but, this hasn't happened yet. Why are you putting yourself through that? And he goes, I don't have to prepare for good news. And I thought that was a very interesting statement.
Mhm.
You can surprise me with good news. I don't want to be surprised with bad news, you know, and there's a wisdom in that.
Mhm.
But it's just my makeup is just different.
I think that's true. Yeah. I remember 2016, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And there were a number of our team members, especially that we talked about. And one of them said to me, "You don't seem scared at all about this." And I said, "My biggest concern is that I'll miss a workshop, that we got to handle this in a way that I don't miss a workshop." I said, got to make the workshop like that, and it wasn't near death type of situation. We caught it in time and I got a great doctor you know, but my whole concern was I've made a commitment to have workshops and I'm gonna, and it was 30 days later and I gave a complete workshop and nobody noticed. I hadn't told any clients that I had just gone through cancer operation. And I said, what matters is that they have a great workshop.
When Cary Grant died, he was backstage. He was going to be doing a play and he had a stroke and it was quite bad. And he said, I'm so sorry. I don't want to disappoint the audience. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Now, my mom, who was very close to, when she was going into the hospital for surgery, and I was on one side of the gurney, my Aunt Ida was on the other side. My Aunt Ida was a tough piece of gristle, as they say. And she looked at my mom and said, Lily, I'm not concerned about you one bit. And my mom said, Ida, if I was standing where you are and you were laying where I am, I wouldn't be concerned either. Yeah, what happened, a real inciting incident for me was when we were in lockdown for COVID and there was no live production business going on. And it was not clear when, if ever, it would be going on, during those early days. We could be out of commission for, it ended up almost a year and a half, but it could have been, longer, might have been 2 months. Nobody knew, right? But what I did know was I'm going to be in a rebuilding phase once this lifts. And so what do I want to do? And what do I want to do with my time? And my mantra became, if not now, when? So that if not now, when applied to putting all my energy into the play and moving that forward and making that happen. It was funny. We had a meeting the other day with this management company. We're going through a series of those now for finding people in the UK. And we were talking about that. And they said, well, the likelihood of getting space at South Bank Center and then getting a venue on the West End, I mean, it's the odds are really against you. I mean, that's just really, really tough. And I said, The odds of me talking to you about my play opening in London and the fact that we've made it this far has beaten all of those odds. So I don't care if the odds are tough. What can we do? What are the actions we can take to move this forward? And, I think the more committed you are to something, the less you care. And I'm not doing this foolishly at all, but the less you care about the obstacles, because when aren't there obstacles? There's always obstacles. There's always stuff you got to deal with. And so I just believe that when I was thinking about, so what do I want to rebuild my production business? Do I want to find a new office space? Do I want to staff up again? No, because there's nothing that I haven't done other than make a feature film. There was nothing that I hadn't done in my business that I wanted to do. So to your point earlier in our talk, to me, it was about, I didn't think about it, but I love the way that you put it, making my future bigger than my past. I didn't think about it that way. I was just thinking about this is new and exciting.
Yeah.
And you happen to be correct. Yes, it is bigger than anything I've ever done, but it's that too. And if it wasn't the exciting part, and if I wasn't seduced by the idea of doing it, that was the thing. But COVID was really a point of transition, and that mantra of if not now, when? And that's that's the only time really that so far, that's the only time that I'm conscious of my age is, that I know it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. But would I have changed anything? No. I mean, are there different decisions I might have made at certain junctures just strategically? Yeah, probably. But the idea of doing something again, being seduced by the idea and trying to do it. And it gets real simple too. I mean, I would remember I'd say to somebody, said, did you talk to so-and-so, some decision we needed? And they'd say, well, they haven't called back yet. I said, wait a minute. They haven't called back yet. Then you call them. I don't want to be a pest. It's not about being a pest. It's about moving this enterprise forward. You call them. And it's really interesting, even in little ways, it's like the death by 1,000 cuts. I think that's why, by the way, the Nike Just Do It slogan is the best that's ever been invented, because it has so many layers of meaning. And it's just don't ruminate about stuff that you can actually move forward by just doing it. Mm-hmm. Because, what's all that marinating in your anxiety going to do for you? Nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing here is about decisions. And I tell people, decisions are really good because the word from Latin decidere means to kill off the alternative. Mm. And I said, the first thing you have to do is people talk about, choice. I make choices. I don't make decisions. And I says, choices means that there's still alternatives. I'm choosing this one, but I'm not giving up on that one either. I said, no, you have to kill the others off. And when I say kill them off is the alternatives don't have access to your brain anymore. Okay. Mm-hmm. Your brain is just, if there is a possibility in the world that you're going to do this and it's going to be successful, give all your energy to that. Don't give any energy to anything else.
Yeah, you're right. And again, things get jargonized. When you really look at it, what's the difference between the choice that you want to make and the decision you want to make? You can make a choice not to make a decision, I guess, which is called procrastination. And sometimes that can be valuable.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a decision. You just say, I'm putting it off to here. That's a decision. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. But I've had people who I can tell they're up against something. My experience is that it's never business and it's never economical. It's always social. It has to do with their relationships with somebody. Okay. And I said, one person, he had this great technological breakthrough, told us all about it. And I think I said this on a previous podcast. He told us about it. It was in the area of science and medicine. And so 90 days later, he comes back for his next coach workshop and he's not saying anything. I says, wait a minute, you got everybody in the room excited. You had investors, if you had wanted investors that were in this room who would have, written you checks. Now there's nothing. And he says, no, it's really complicated. I said, okay. Comes back next 90 days. I said, let's have lunch. And I said, can I make a stab at what's stopping you from going forward? And he said, sure. And I said, she can get half of everything up until now, but she doesn't get half of the new future. He says, yeah. I said, how long have you known this? And she said, 17 years. Mm. So I said, okay, it's a year from now and you haven't done anything. Is that okay with you? And he said, no. I said, 6 months, haven't done anything. I got him down to 90 days and he said, okay, I'll do it. And 5 days later, he sent her the divorce papers.
And you say you're not a therapist?
I'm not a therapist. I just want to see what's going on. I just want to see what's going on in his brain, I want him to see what's going on in his brain.
Which is what a therapist does. And by the way, I say that with respect, not being snide at all. I think that in your domain, what makes you so good at what you do are the questions that you ask and get your clients to think about. And that's what it is. There's no good therapist either that just gives you answers. That's not a good therapist. It's, how do you think about what you're thinking about? And even setting up the parameters. Well, is it 6 months, 90 days? Mm-hmm. Because then you're making him accountable for an action. Yeah. And are you going to be accountable for that action, or are you just going to tell me the same bullshit next time we get together?
Well, he wasn't telling me any bullshit. He was just, well, I guess he was. He said, there's complications. But I always find that it comes back to, for example, we have two sets of sales team. We have the get them into the program salespeople, and we have the keep them in the program salespeople. And then we have a second set of salesmen who bring them back into the program if they've left the program. But I tell them, if they say workshop after workshop, they come in, they're in their first year, and they're gangbusters. They're doing what the program suggests they can do, and they're getting great success. And they come to the first year because we always renew at the end of each year. There's no 5-year renewals or anything like that. Every year we face them with the fact that they have to make a decision and they have to write another check. It's good for them and it's good for us. So I said, if everything is working with the program, their business is really growing, they're enjoying it, they're talking great story, and they say they don't want to come back, it's always social. And that is that their growth, their sudden growth, is making the people they live with uncomfortable. And they're deciding not to make their relationships uncomfortable because of their growth. They're making a decision between their relationships and their growth. And I said, now, you pointing this out may not get them to come back, but you ought to at least tell them what the issue is. Their business has nothing to do with the coaching program. It has to do with the people whose opinion matters most to them don't want them to grow anymore. And I said, it's going to happen. And I said, they're going to make the decision, and sometimes they come back 5 years from now and they said, I should never have left. And I said, but at least face them with what the issue really is.
Yeah. It's tough because also it's important to communicate to those most important. If there's going to be an impact on your life, as opposed to playing that close to the vest with the people that are most affected by you in your life, a spouse or children who have grown up, whatever it is, that discussion should be had with them, because a lot of times they'll build up a whole notion of what they think it's going to be, what the response is going to be, but they actually don't even know that. So where we started off was how you started off your clientele in insurance and finance. If you would have started off your business coaching writers, do you think you would have been successful? Or do you think this path was the only one you'd be successful at?
Looking back, this was a great way to start. I'll say that, because I had other people who were in different professions who, thrived on the program and that, but they didn't have that networking effect. I went to a top of the table meeting. I was invited by one of my original, and I got 31 signups on one day.
Mm.
And I came back, and usually, we'd get 2 or 3 signups. I would talk somewhere 2 or 3 because it was a big check, And I came and I had them in a briefcase, and I said, I got one. And they said, oh, that's great. And I got another one. By the time I hit 8, and I said, I got 31, and this is my sales team. This is the biggest sales day that any salesperson ever had in the history of the company. But the thing is that we really grill people that they're really serious about the program. We spend a lot of time asking them what they're going to do with the program, why the program makes a difference. Is there any conflicts they have in their life? And this just is from experience where people have had those things and it's caused a problem. So, yeah.
But do you think no matter what, whether it was starting off with the insurance group and the knock-on business you got from them, I guess the question is, was that the only thing you think you would have been successful at, or do you think anything you would have tackled, being who you are, you'd have found a way to be successful in that pursuit?
Probably. Yeah. 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 But I'm happy the way it went.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I caught something that was very early in its making, coaching entrepreneurs. Part of the sale back then was what was an entrepreneurial coach? Nobody really knew what it was. So, and I think that for people who were doing it in 1974, I'm the only one still doing it.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really good. Yeah. This was a very rich conversation. The whole why do entrepreneurs do what they do? How do they do it? That is, and my current quarterly book is called The Bill of Rights Economy. And I'm showing how the first 10 amendments to the Constitution unusually support entrepreneurism, and very interesting because who were the people who put the Constitution together? They all had businesses of one kind. I mean, they, for the most part, some were lawyers, but they were still had to run a business. A big risk. Those guys took a big risk.
They did, and we're still at risk. It's a work in process.
Oh yeah, the Constitution, if you really get down to it, it creates a lot of chaos.
Well, true. That's why there's so many lawyers involved in all of this.
No, I think it's reason because guns and lawyers. More or less for the same reason.
Yes. Was that a rock group? Oh, no, that was Guns N' Roses.
Yeah. Okay. I have a client in San Diego. He's Israeli, actually South African, but then he became an Israeli. And he's really big on guns. After the October 7th, he had all these Jewish friends all over San Diego who wanted to learn how to fire a gun. And he said, got the name for it. We're going to call it Guns and Moses. They had people signing up and, basic safety and everything like that, Always with a sense of humor, though.
Thanks for joining us today on our show, Anything and Everything. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. For more about me and my work, visit acreativecareer.com and madoffproductions.com. To learn more about Dan and Strategic Coach, visit strategiccoach.com.